Hey guys, Drifter here. Welcome to Black Ops 4 In Depth. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about Blackout weapons, damages, and ranges because they differ significantly from that of multiplayer. There's going to be a lot of really interesting stuff in today's episode, so please pay attention closely. And before we get started, I do want to give a quick shout out to the Ultimate Gamer giveaway. We're giving away a gaming PC, monitor, keyboard, mouse, headset, basically everything you need to go from empty room to streaming setup down there below in the description. If you want to do that, it ends at the beginning of the new year. So let's jump into Blackout weapons, damages, and ranges and all that. In Blackout, weapons, obviously you can put on different attachments than you can in multiplayer because multiplayer has some restrictions. They have different damage profiles, different ranges, and some weapons now have different recoil as well. For today, we're going to focus on the damage and the ranges, and thankfully, as far as I can tell of everything I've tested, they all have the same headshot multipliers that they do in multiplayer, minus the high caliber stuff, and the same rate of fire. And for today, let's do rifles only, for the sake of my sanity and building bad graphs and for testing, and because rifles are by far the most popular class of weapon in Blackout, and it's the thing that most people choose. What kind of rifle am I going to carry, or which two rifles? So let's really focus in on that. And overall, damages in Blackout are much lower than they are in multiplayer, but the ranges over which these damages are applied are roughly tripled, and they're also mostly linear drops instead of stair steps. So to start with, the ICR will deal 32 damage up close in Blackout, declining down to 25 at a distance. And when I mean at a distance, I mean at a serious distance. We'll show those in a bit. The Maddox is really weak at 27 to 22. These are more like SMG damages in regular multiplayer. And the Vapor is pretty similar to the ICR at 32 to 24 damage. If you're looking for some higher damage weapons, you can take a look at the Rampart, which is going to be the highest damage rifle in Blackout at 37 to 29, the KN57 at 37 to 24, and the SWAT is going to be 36 to 25. So these are going to be the high damage ones, and you'll notice that really only the Rampart maintains that high damage over the range. The other two drop off to be very similar to the other rifles. And no, I didn't cover the ABR, the Swordfish, or the Auger. I'm probably going to do that in an entirely different episode because they're much higher damage and they are much beastlier than this, but not many people pick them over full autos, except maybe the ABR. Even those that do pick them over full autos, you always have a full auto in reserve, so full auto is still really the thing around which most of the game revolves. Most of these damages that I just read out are about 5 damage points lower than they are in multiplayer, both in maximum and minimum. In general, some are 4 lower, 6 lower, whatever. However, the Rampart is way weaker. The Rampart got a much bigger nerf in Blackout than it did in multiplayer, and on top of that, you obviously can't put high caliber 2 on there and get like 60 damage chest shots, which is just bonkers. You can't do that here. So now that we know the damage numbers, let's take a look at the ranges, and this is where things get kind of crazy. I did a lot of testing in Discord. We pulled in some subscribers, we went into Blackout custom games, and we tested out the ranges at which these weapons start dealing less damage, and the results were that they have really insane range. For the ICR, the red lines are 32 damage, and the orange lines are 26 damage, and then you're finally dealing 25 over there at the yellow lines. I wanted to make this one first to illustrate the effect of long barrel. The bottom line that is slightly longer on each point is with long barrel on, and also this one is unique in that it only has 3 distinct damage ranges. This one's 32, 26, 25, and then 25 just kind of forever. And as you can see, long barrel doesn't have the most significant effect on these damage ranges, but I do talk about that later in this video. I talk a lot about long barrel. I do want to give you an approximation of how this looks though. This is roughly the maximum damage range in which I'm shooting the Shadow Man, and this is roughly the minimum damage range where it's kind of starting to not do a whole lot of damage. It's gone down to 25 at about that point. The Maddox has way lower ranges. You can see that the Maddox has a 27 damage range that doesn't even cover the bridge. The 26 damage range is shorter than that. And for the rest of these graphs, I kind of ran out of colors. I can't see colors very well. I'm colorblind. So I decided to go ahead and go with white dashes. Each one of these white dashes is 1 drop in damage. It has sort of a linear drop, not a lot of stair stepping here. So that's 25, 26, 24, whatever, all the way on down to its minimum. And those are the approximate ranges at which they occur. The Vapor, however, is looking really nice. The Vapor has a maximum damage range, much like that of the ICR, and then it starts decreasing 1 point at a time, but pretty rapidly, as you can see by the graph. I'm not just drawing in random numbers there. I know it looks really crappy because I can't see colors and I can't do graphic design, but the point of this is it's going to go 31, 30, 29, 28, 27, 26, and it's going to every couple of meters stair step on down pretty rapidly. However, you'll see that it'll maintain a 27 damage range for a much longer range than the ICR will maintain its 26 damage range. So you have much better range overall with the Vapor. The SWAT's kind of crazy because the SWAT has a 36 damage range up close, and then it rapidly falls off 1 point at a time, but really, really rapidly decreasing down to very low damage. And you'll kind of see this overall is that most weapons in Blackout that have a high initial damage, they have a really fast stair-stepping down function that ramps their damage down over range. The KN57 has the worst overall range in Blackout amongst the rifles, at least as far as I can tell. It's got a nice 37 damage, but at a pretty miserable range that doesn't even cover, not hit 3/4 of the bridge there. And like the SWAT and the other weapons, it very, very rapidly begins to tick down. This one even more rapidly than the SWAT. The Rampart is a little bit of an anomaly. The Rampart will deal 37 damage at its maximum damage range, and it's not as good as the ICR or the Vapor, but it's pretty good. It more or less covers the entire bridge, and it will then begin to stair step down 1 point of damage per little tick that you see there. But the ticks are a little bit bigger than some of the other guns, and on top of that, there's a long way to go before the damage starts getting significantly lower. Now, that gives you a good visual approximation of how long these ranges are. Obviously, they're much longer than that of multiplayer, but as you saw with the little white dashes kind of going off the screen, we haven't really talked about minimum damage ranges very much. I had to zoom out way more and I actually accidentally bonked my camera into the skybox a few times. If you want to talk about where your weapons are going to be dealing their minimum damage range, most weapons' minimum damage range is going to be about here, or shooting all the way across Turbine from the bridge to the shacks out there. That's about the range that every weapon is going to be dealing its minimum damage. For the Rampart, however, I had to zoom out even further. The Rampart's minimum damage is just bananas, bonkers, broken, whatever you want to call it. The Rampart's minimum damage is way out beyond the sheds, just like in the mountains somewhere. So the Rampart has really, really incredible range in Blackout. So with that information, let's talk about the effects of long barrel and suppressor. I did some side-by-side testing, some frame counting, some slow motion, and some measuring, and what I measured for long barrel was about a 15% increase in range. It's not very significant. When your bullet is going to have about a 10% increase in velocity. I measured this by shooting long-range targets and timing the frames it takes for the bullets to hit the ground, and across the board, most weapons got about 10% more bullet velocity, which means less leading, and you got slightly less bullet drop. It is noticeable, but it's not as crazy as it used to be in the beta, and that slightly less drop is interesting along with the velocity because when you put on a suppressor, you only get negative 15% range, which isn't very much, and the bullet drop that you get is only slightly more. The bullet drop is not as significant as I once thought it was, at least when I was measuring here. Don't get me wrong, your bullets do drop more over range, not a ton, but there was also no measurable change in velocity. The suppressor made no effect whatsoever on bullet velocity, at least not that I could measure, which means the suppressor really isn't that bad of an attachment, and I think that my complaints about it and the reason that I don't like it is because I'm a big long barrel fanboy, so I'm always used to having that boosted velocity and range and drop, and not just going to normal, but completely swinging back to the other side is sometimes difficult, but the suppressor overall isn't so bad. So given this data, let's try to draw some conclusions that'll help you make better decisions in Blackout. In Blackout, given the amount of armor that people have and the amount of healing and status effects and stuff like that, it's probably better to look at these weapons in terms of DPS instead of raw time to kill. So if you take a look at the close range DPS table, which is, we're going to roughly consider that about the range of that bridge, the Maddox and the ICR are pretty similar to each other at about 320 each. The Rampart has the lowest DPS, which kind of surprised me. I thought the high damage would make up for it. Vapor is looking really nice at 343, KN57 just behind it at very close ranges, but the SWAT is the unquestioned king here at 372 DPS. It's also got a better base shots to kill, rate of fire. That's going to be your close range workhorse. If you're looking at long ranges, you'll have to think more about those graphs and drop and bullet trajectories and all that. For the best performance at range, you're going to want the ICR or the Rampart. The ICR, if you're going full auto, will have better DPS, and obviously it has lower recoil, but it maintains a pretty high damage over range. for long range, the Rampart really just can't be beaten. The Rampart has insane damage over long ranges, but up close and medium range, if you want to go full auto and spray, it's a little bit more struggle bussy and not as amazing on the DPS. However, I do want to give a shout out to the Vapor. If you're looking at the overall best performance, I think the Vapor is going to be the best thing in the game for DPS and range-wise. It comes in second to the SWAT for close range, but then it has an excellent medium-range combat performance, better than that of the ICR, but shoots faster than them, and it, I would say, overall outperforms most of the weapons in the game and would be easily the best in Blackout, but it suffers from recoil and idle sway issues. Over the last couple weeks I've been playing, I've mostly avoided the SWAT because it has a lot of idle sway and it has a shaky recoil, and it's just not as dependable as the ICR, obviously because it's low recoil, or when it comes to the Rampart is more predictable than the Vapor, even though it kicks more. But if you're going to go for close quarters combat, nothing beats the SWAT. The SWAT's just crazy good for Final Circle. If you plan to fight people up close, just ignore everything else from this episode and use the SWAT to shred them. The SWAT also is really good for getting headshots. It puts you over that sort of minimum shots to kill, which is very, very nice. And guys, that is all for this episode of In Depth. I hope that you learned something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Drifter out.